Hey guys, tonight we are going way back. We're traveling to a time before skyscrapers, before electricity, even before the idea that maybe, just maybe, dumping your trash into the street wasn't the best public health strategy. We're heading to the early 14th century, to the heart of medieval Europe, to witness the spectacular, dramatic, and frankly, very messy fall of one of history's most powerful and mysterious organizations, the Knights Templar. This is a story of faith, finance, a king who was really bad with money, and a conspiracy so wild it's still making headlines 700 years later. And you're going to have a front row seat. Just a heads up, life expectancy back then wasn't great, so try not to drink the water. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments what city you're in and what time it is. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight, but the smell. It's a thick, complicated aroma. A stew of wood smoke, roasting meat, damp earth, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present, pungent scent of the River Seine, which serves as both a highway and a sewer. You've just arrived in Paris. The year is 1306. Don't look for the Eiffel Tower. The tallest things on the skyline are the spires of Notre Dame Cathedral, still relatively new and gleaming. The streets are narrow, crooked lanes, more like muddy alleyways, really. Timber-framed houses lean precariously over you, their upper floors almost touching, casting the street below in a perpetual twilight. It's loud. The air buzzes with the shouts of merchants hawking their wares, the clatter of wooden cart wheels on cobblestones, the braying of donkeys, and the chime of a dozen different church bells, all keeping their own time. You pull your cloak a little tighter, feeling utterly out of place. People jostle past you, a river of humanity in drab, earthy tones. You're looking for something specific, a place you've only heard about in hushed, reverent tones. You ask a passing friar for directions, and he points a thin finger towards the northeastern edge of the city. He doesn't say the name, he just gestures, as if the place itself is too imposing for casual conversation. You follow his direction, and soon, the chaotic jumble of the city begins to change. The streets get a little wider, the buildings a bit more orderly, and then you see it. It rises from the urban squalor like a stone cliff. This is the enclosed du Temple, the Paris Temple. But temple is too gentle a word. This is a fortress, a massive, walled compound that is a city within a city. High, thick stone walls punctuated by grim, defensive towers completely cut it off from the rest of Paris. It's a statement of power, of order in the midst of chaos. It's so vast that it has its own churches, dormitories, stables, and gardens contained within its walls. You stand before the main gate, a heavy wooden door bound with iron, set into a formidable gatehouse. Above it, chiseled in stone, you might just make out a faint cross, but the splayed distinctive cross of the Knights Templar. This is the nerve center of the Templar order in all of Europe. And what's fascinating is that while you see guards on the walls, their white mantles marked with that famous red cross, the real business here isn't sharpening swords. It's finance. You see a wealthy-looking merchant and his aide being admitted through a smaller side gate. They carry a heavy-looking ledger. This is because the Templars have created one of the most sophisticated banking systems the world has ever seen. A nobleman could deposit a fortune in their London temple, receive a coded slip of parchment, and travel to the Holy Land, where he could present that note at a Templar preceptor in Acre or Jerusalem and withdraw his funds. It was safe, it was efficient, and it made them fabulously wealthy. Historians still marvel at the complexity of their coded letters of credit, an early form of traveler's check that fueled the Crusades and international trade. As you linger near the gate, you notice a group of young men, barely out of their teens, being led inside. They look nervous, excited. They are postal ants, hoping to be accepted into the order. And this brings up one of the greatest mysteries. What actually happens in their initiation ceremony? The official line is a simple vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But whispers and rumors which you can't quite place suggests something more, something secret. Do they have to perform strange acts to prove their loyalty? Do they learn secrets known only to the Order? Historians to this day are locked in a fierce debate over this. The accusations that will soon come will paint a dark, blasphemous picture of these ceremonies. But right now, watching these earnest young faces, it's impossible to know whether those future claims are vicious lies or a twisted version of some secret, solemn truth. The most powerful man in France, King Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair for his handsome, emotional face, knows the power of this place better than anyone. In fact, just a year ago, when riots broke out in Paris over a currency devaluation, he fled for his own safety and took refuge right here, behind these very walls. The irony is staggering. The royal treasury of France is stored in the Templar vaults for safekeeping. The king is, in essence, a client of the very organization he is growing to resent. Standing here, in the long shadow of the temple's tower, you can feel the immense, stable, quiet power radiating from the stone. It seems unshakable, permanent, a pillar of Christendom. But the wind is changing, and whispers of debt, jealousy, and royal ambition are beginning to swirl through the muddy streets of Paris like the first cold gust of a coming storm. The grandeur of the Paris temple fades from your mind's eye, its cold, imposing stone dissolving like a dream. The air grows hot, dry, and thick with choking dust. The smell of the Seine is replaced by the scent of sand, spices, and something else, a faint, metallic tang of tension. You're standing in Jerusalem, but it's nearly 200 years earlier, around the year 1120. This is a city on the edge, a Christian kingdom carved out of a hostile land, won by the sword during the First Crusade just a couple of decades ago. The roads are not safe. Pilgrims who travel from the port city of Jaffa to the holy sites in Jerusalem do so at their own peril, facing constant threats from bandits and roving soldiers. This is where you first meet them, and they look nothing like the formidable, wealthy guards of the Paris temple. You see a small group of men, maybe 9 of them, led by a knight from Champagne named Dukes de Payens. They are not robed in pristine white mantles. Their gear is worn, their mail shirts perhaps a little rusty in places, their horses lean. They present themselves to the King of Jerusalem, bold one-eye, and make a radical proposal. They wish to form a new kind of order, a brotherhood of monks with swords. Their sole purpose, they claim, is to dedicate their lives to protecting the pilgrim routes. They will take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, just like other monastic orders, but their monastery will be the dangerous roads of the Holy Land. The king is intrigued. He grants them a headquarters, a space in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount, which the Crusaders believed was the site of the original Temple of Solomon. And just like that, their official name is born, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. The poor part, at this stage, is no joke. They are entirely dependent on donations to survive. Their first seal, which you can imagine them carving, becomes one of the most iconic images of the order. It shows 2 knights fully armed, sharing a single horse. This was a powerful piece of branding, meant to convey their profound poverty and the spirit of brotherhood. It's a beautifully humble image that will become deeply ironic in about 100 years when their single horse is metaphorically replaced by a massive international property portfolio and a fleet of ships. But here's where the story gets a little murky, and the first whispers of conspiracy begin. For nearly a decade, these 9 knights are, well, it's not entirely clear what they're doing. The official story is that they're protecting pilgrims, but think about it. 9 men to patrol all the dangerous roads leading to Jerusalem. It seems optimistic, to put it mildly. This has led to one of the most enduring arguments among historians and one of the foundational theories for treasure hunters. The argument is that they weren't just patrolling. They were digging, given lodging on the literal Temple Mount, the holiest site in Judaism, a place of immense historical and religious significance. Were they conducting the world's most ambitious archaeological excavation? Were they searching for lost holy relics like the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail? Or were they looking for something more tangible like the legendary treasure of King Solomon? Orthodox historians often dismiss this as romantic fantasy, while others argue it's the only logical explanation for their long, quiet years on the Mount. The debate still rages in academic papers and late-night documentaries. Whatever they were doing, their big break came not from a sword fight, but from a PR campaign. Ernest traveled back to Europe in 1127. His secret weapon was a man named Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was the 12th century equivalent of a rockstar monk, a hugely influential Cistercian abbot with a direct line to the Pope. He also happened to be the nephew of one of the founding Templars. Bernard wrote a treatise called De Laude Novae Militiae, in praise of the new knighthood. In it, he eloquently and passionately argued that these Templars were not mere soldiers, they were a holy militia. He solved a major theological problem. How can you be a Christian monk and also a killer? Bernard argued that killing a pagan to defend Christendom wasn't homicide. It was maligide, the killing of evil itself. This was revolutionary. It was the theological green light they needed. At the Council of Troyes in 1129, the Knights Templar were officially recognized by the Church. They were given their own rule of conduct, a strict list of 72 regulations, then were granted the right to wear their iconic white mantle, a symbol of purity. The famous Red Cross would be added a few years later. Suddenly, they were not just a ragtag band of well-meaning knights, they were God's own special forces. And with that papal seal of approval, the floodgates opened. Donations started pouring in from every corner of Europe. Wealthy lords and ladies, eager to secure their place in heaven, bequeathed them vast tracts of land, castles, farms, mills, and cash. The poor knights were on their way to becoming anything but. The seed of their unimaginable wealth and power had been planted, not in the dusty soil of the Holy Land, but in the fertile ground of European piety and politics. Let's glide forward in time again, leaving the dusty origins of the Templars behind. We're landing back in Paris, but a bit later now, around 1307. The city feels more crowded, the tension's higher. And this time, we're not lingering outside the temple walls. We're going to the heart of royal power, the Palais de la Cite, a sprawling, fortified palace on the Isle de la Cite, the island in the middle of the Seine. This is the residence of the man who will become the Templars' nemesis. His name is Philip IV of France, but HES known to history as Philippe le Bel, or Philip the Fair. As you walk the cold stone corridors of his palace, you pass by stern-faced administrators and lawyers. Lots and lots of lawyers. This is a key detail. Philip isn't your typical medieval brawler king, leading charges in his shiny armor. HES something new, something more modern, and arguably more dangerous. HES a bureaucrat king, an administrative king. He's tall, exceptionally handsome, hence the nickname, but people who know him say his beauty is unnerving. HES quiet, impassive, and his eyes are said to be as still and cold as a statue's. He rarely shows emotion, preferring to act through his ministers and legal advisors. Some historians see him as a pious, devout man, genuinely believing he was God's chosen instrument to purify France. Others paint him as a ruthless, calculating mischievous, obsessed with consolidating royal power and filling his coffers, no matter the cost. The truth, as is so often the case, is probably a complex and unsettling mix of both. And Philip has a very big, very expensive problem. He is broke. Spectacularly broke. His entire reign has been a series of costly wars, primarily against the English and the Flemish. Wars require soldiers, and soldiers require payment. Philip has tried everything to raise money. He devalued the currency so many times that it caused the riots that sent him running to the Templars for protection. He expelled the Jews from France in 1306, seizing all their assets and property. This gave him a temporary cash injection but wrecked the kingdom's credit system. He then did the same to the Lombard bankers, another group of foreign financiers. He taxed the clergy so aggressively that he ended up in a titanic struggle with the Pope himself. Boniface VII, a conflict that ended with the Pope being arrested by Philip's agents and dying from the shock shortly after. It's safe to say Philip is not afraid to cross lines that other kings wouldn't even dare to approach. Now, from his perspective, as he sits in his palace looking out over his kingdom, he sees one group that seems immune to the economic chaos he's created, the Knights Templar. Their fortress, the temple, dominates his city's skyline. They are exempt from paying taxes to him, answering only to the Pope. A sore subject for Philip, given his track record with popes. They hold a significant portion of the royal treasury in their vaults for safekeeping. He owes them a colossal amount of money from loans he took to finance his wars. Every time he sees a white-mantled knight, he is not just seeing a holy warrior, he is seeing a creditor. A creditor who is richer, better organized, and more internationally connected than he is. Here's a little-known fact that really highlights the tension. Philip actually floated the idea of merging all the military orders, the Templars and their main rivals, the Hospitals, into one big order. And he proposed that he, the King of France, should be its new lifelong King Master. You can imagine how well that went over. The Templar Grand Master at the time, Jacques de Molay, politely but firmly rejected the idea. For Philip, this must have been the ultimate snub. He, the anointed King of France, was being told no by a mere knight. It was a clear sign that the Templars saw themselves as a sovereign power, independent of his authority. In the quiet, calculating mind of Philip the Fair, a plan begins to form. It's audacious, ruthless, and brilliant in its own terrible way. He has a playbook. He used it against the Jews, and he used it against the Lombards. But the Templars are different. They are not a minority group of merchants. They are a beloved, powerful, and armed institution of the Church. You can't just expel them. You have to destroy them. You have to discredit them so completely that no one will dare to defend them. And how do you do that? You don't attack their finances, you attack their faith. You accuse them of the worst crime imaginable in the medieval world, heresy. As you stand in the shadows of the royal court, you can almost hear the gears of the state turning. The king's warriors are being assembled. Whispers are being collected. A narrative is being crafted. The problem isn't that the Templars are rich. The problem is that they are heretics. And Philip, in his cold, pious certainty, is convincing himself that it's his sacred duty to go into France to expose them. The grand political stage of the royal palace dissolves, and you find yourself in a much more mundane, yet equally revealing setting. You're standing in the courtyard of a Templar preceptor. Why? Think of it as a local branch office. This isn't the grand fortress of Paris or London. It's a smaller, functional compound, maybe in the countryside of Champagne or the south of France. It's a collection of stone buildings, a small chapel, a dormitory, a refectory for meals, and, most importantly, barns, stables, and a mill. This is the engine room of the Templar enterprise, the source of their incredible wealth. And your daily life here would look very different from the nightly adventures you might imagine. The first thing you'd notice is the routine. It's incredibly disciplined, almost monastic. The day is structured around prayers, starting before dawn. But in between the religious services, the real work gets done. You see knights, but they aren't practicing their jousting skills. One, a man with a weathered face and calloused hands, is overseeing the grain harvest on the surrounding farmland. Another is inspecting the accounts in a small, dusty office, his brow furrowed in concentration. The Templars were, first and foremost, superb administrators. They ran their thousands of properties across Europe with brutal efficiency. They were pioneers of estate management. They knew which crops to plant, how to manage livestock, and how to turn a profit from their forests and vineyards. A significant portion of their income came from simple rent. Then there's the banking. You watch as a local merchant arrives. HES not depositing a massive fortune for a crusade. HES doing something much more ordinary. He needs to pay a supplier in another town. A dangerous journey with a bag of coins. Instead, he gives the money to the Templar treasurer here. The treasurer notes it down in a ledger, takes a small fee, and gives the merchant a coded letter. The merchant then travels to the other town, goes to the Templar house there, presents the letter, and his supplier is paid from the funds held at that location. It's safe, reliable, and builds immense trust. You are witnessing the gears of a multinational corporation in the 14th century. They weren't just storing money, they were moving it, investing it, and changing the entire European economy in the process. Let's talk about the people here. Only a small fraction, maybe 10-15%, of the men in a preceptor were actually knights, the warrior nobles entitled to wear the white mantle. The majority are sergeants who come from lower social ranks. They wear black or brown tunics. They are the backbone of the organization. The farmers, the blacksmiths, the accountants, the administrators. They do most of the day-to-day work. Then there are the chaplains, the priests of the order, who are responsible for the spiritual life of the house. It's a highly organized, hierarchical society. But even in this disciplined environment, there are oddities. Here's a bizarre little detail from the Templar Rule, their official book of regulations. Rule 38 explicitly forbids knights from having painted or pointed shoes. It was seen as a sign of worldly vanity. But the really weird one is Rule 46. We forbid you to kiss any woman, be it widow, young girl, mother, sister, aunt, or any other. Total ban. This was to uphold their vow of chastity. However, historians still debate a curious omission. The rule explicitly forbids kissing women, but it says nothing about men. This silence would later be twisted by Philip's interrogators into a sinister accusation of institutionalized homosexuality, a charge designed to shock and appall the medieval public. Whether this was just a poorly phrased rule or a reflection of the all-male, military barracks culture is something we'll never truly know. Life here is repetitive, disciplined, and largely peaceful. It's a world away from the battlefields of the Holy Land. These men are not fierce warriors fighting Saracens. They are, for the most part, glorified farm managers and provincial bankers. And this created a perception problem. For the average peasant or even the local lord, the Templars were no longer seen as holy defenders of Christendom. They were seen as powerful, secretive, and fantastically wealthy landlords who didn't pay taxes. They were the aloof corporation with the prime real estate, the ones who held your debts. Their success had made them remote and to some unrelatable. As evening falls, the bell calls everyone to the refectory for a simple meal, eaten in silence while one of the chaplains reads from scripture. There's a sense of order, of purpose, but there's also an insularity. The Templars keep to themselves. Their business is their own, their ceremonies are their own, their finances are their own. This secrecy, once a sign of their solemn purpose, is beginning to look like arrogance. It breeds suspicion. People wonder, what exactly do they do behind those closed doors? This combination of immense wealth, political influence, and a carefully cultivated air of mystery is a potent and ultimately flammable cocktail. They have become too successful for their own good, and they are about to find out that the world they so expertly managed has turned against them. The peaceful, predictable rhythm of the French preceptor Y dissolves, and the scent of fertile earth is replaced by the salty, bitter smell of the sea. You're standing on the battlements of a city, the sun beating down mercilessly. The air is thick with smoke, the screams of the dying, and the relentless noise of war. This is Acre, the last great Crusader stronghold in the Holy Land. The year is 1291, and you are about to witness the end of an era. For 2 centuries, this city has been the capital of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a bustling, cosmopolitan hub of trade and military power. Now, it is under siege by the massive army of the Mamluk Sultanate. You can see the Templar Knights, their white mantles stained with sweat and blood, fighting with a desperate ferocity. They are defending their section of the wall, led by their Grand Master, a grim, determined man named Guillaume de Beaujeu. They are disciplined, they are brave, but they are hopelessly outnumbered. The dream of a Christian kingdom in the east is collapsing, stone by stone, right before your eyes. You watch as the Mamluk forces breach the walls. The fighting spills into the streets, a brutal, chaotic melee. Grandmaster de Beaujeu is mortally wounded by an arrow. As his knights carry him from the field, he reportedly says, "I am not running away, I am dead." The city falls. The last bastion of the Crusader states is wiped from the map. A handful of Templars manage a heroic last stand in their seaside fortress, allowing some civilians to escape by ship before they too are overwhelmed. A few knights, including the future Grand Master Jacques de Molay, manage to escape to the nearby island of Cyprus, but the dream is over. The very reason for the Templars' existence, their primary mission to defend the Holy Land, has been extinguished. They are soldiers with no war to fight, guardians with nothing left to guard. You find yourself on Cyprus a few months later. The island is teeming with refugees from the mainland. Knights, nobles, merchants, all dazed and demoralized. The Templars established their new headquarters here, but it feels temporary, hollow. The atmosphere is one of defeat and bitter recrimination. Back in Europe, the fall of Acre is a profound shock. For 200 years, the continent had poured its faith, its money, and the lives of its sons into the Crusades. And now, it had all come to nothing. Someone had to be blamed. And the military orders, especially the Templars, became an easy target. People started asking uncomfortable questions. Why did they fail? With all their wealth, all their castles, all their manpower, how could they have lost the Holy Land? Rumors, often fueled by their rivals, the Knights Hospitaller, began to circulate. They were accused of arrogance, of feuding with other Christian factions instead of uniting against the enemy. Some whispered they had grown soft, more interested in their banking ledgers than their swords. A particularly damaging rumor suggested the Templars had even engaged in secret truces and alliances with Muslim leaders, a sensible military tactic on the ground, but one that sounded like treason when repeated in the pulpits of Paris and Rome. Here's a small but telling detail from this period. The Templars, desperate to prove their continued relevance, launched a couple of minor, ill-fated military expeditions from Cyprus. In 1302, they established a small garrison on the tiny island of Ruad, just off the Syrian coast. It was a symbolic gesture, a final Christian foothold in the region. But it was a disaster. The Mamluks besieged the island, and the outnumbered Templars were captured. Those who weren't killed were taken as prisoners to Cairo, where they were left to rot in dungeons. This failure was another nail in their coffin, publicly demonstrating their inability to reclaim any part of the Holy Land. So now you have a vast, incredibly wealthy, and powerful multinational organization with no clear purpose. Their original mission is obsolete. This creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushes suspicion and jealousy. For King Philip of France, this is the perfect opportunity. The Templars are at their weakest, their prestige at an all-time low. They are like a giant corporation that has just lost its flagship product. They're still rich, but they're vulnerable. Their immense wealth, once justified as necessary for the defense of Christendom, now looks like hoarding. Their tax-exempt status, once a privilege granted for holy work, now seems like an unfair advantage. Historians still debate how much the fall of Acre directly led to the Templars' destruction. Some argue it was the primary cause, creating the crisis of purpose that made them vulnerable. Others believe that Philip would have moved against them anyway, driven by his debts and his desire for absolute power. But the loss of the Holy Land certainly provided the perfect pretext. It stripped the Templars of their moral shield. It made the unthinkable, the arrest and dissolution of God's holy knights, suddenly seem possible. The last ship has sailed from Acre, and with it, the Templars' legitimacy has set sail too, leaving them exposed on the shores of a Europe that was rapidly changing and no longer knew what to do with them. The smoky, salty air of the eastern Mediterranean dissolves, and you find yourself back in the chilly, damp corridors of Philip's royal palace in Paris. The year is 1305. The mood here is different now. It's no longer just a general sense of financial anxiety. There's a new energy, a focused, predatory hum. The lawyers and ministers are busier than ever, scurrying in and out of chambers with scrolls of parchment. They speak in low, conspiratorial tones. A secret project is underway. You slip into the shadows of a torchlit chamber where a small group of Philip's most trusted advisors are gathered. Chief among them is Guillaume de Nogaret, the king's keeper of the seal and his primary enforcer. de Nogaret is a man forged in the new mold of ruthless statecraft. He's not a nobleman of ancient lineage. He's a lawyer, a brilliant and fiercely loyal instrument of the king's will. It was de Nogaret who led the infamous mission to arrest Pope Boniface VIII. He is a man who gets things done, unburdened by scruples. There's a persistent, though unproven, rumor that de Nogaret's own grandparents were burned as heretics, giving him a very personal understanding of how such accusations can be weaponized. Whether true or not, He certainly understands the power of a well-crafted smear campaign, and they have found the perfect source for their campaign. His name is Esquire de Floran. He is a man from the south of France, and he claims to be a former Templar, or at least to have intimate knowledge of their secrets. He is the kind of disgruntled individual every secret organization fears. He has a story to sell, and he has been shopping it around to various courts in Europe. He first told his tale to the King of Aragon, who basically laughed him out of the room. But in Philip's court he finds a very receptive audience. You can imagine him, a nervous, shifty-eyed man, standing before Dean O'Garrett and the other ministers, finally having the attention of powerful men. He spins a tale of horror. He claims that the Templars' secret initiation ceremony is a grotesque parody of Christian ritual. He says that new recruits are forced to deny Christ 3 times. They are compelled to spit or even urinate on a crucifix. They are made to engage in obscene kisses, not of chastity but of degradation. Then most sensationally, he claims they worship an idol, a strange head or a cat, in their secret chapter meetings. For Dean O'Garrett and Philip, this is pure gold. It's exactly the kind of material they need. It's shocking, it's blasphemous, and it's almost impossible to disprove. How can the Templars prove what doesn't happen in a secret ceremony? The very secrecy that was part of their mystique now becomes their greatest liability. Dean O'Garrett's legal mind immediately sees how to frame this. This isn't a political move against a rival power. This is a holy duty. The King of France, as the most Christian king, has a sacred obligation to investigate these abominations that have taken root in his kingdom. Here's a small but fascinating detail about medieval law that becomes crucial here. The crime of heresy was considered so foul, so exceptional, that it suspended many normal legal protections. In heresy trials, anonymous testimony was admissible. The accused was often not told who their accusers were. And most importantly, the use of torture to extract a confession was not just allowed but encouraged. Philip's lawyers knew this. They weren't just planning arrests. They were planning an inquisition. The debate among historians rages on this very point. Was Esquire de Floran telling the truth? Was he a bitter ex-employee making things up for revenge or reward? Or did he witness some secret ritual that he misinterpreted or deliberately twisted into something monstrous? Some scholars argue that perhaps parts of the initiation were a strange form of psychological test, a stress test where recruits were asked to symbolically deny Christ to see if their faith was strong enough to protest, a practice some military units use even today. But if such a test existed, and this is a huge if, it was a public relations nightmare waiting to happen. In the hands of a skilled propagandist like Dean O'Garrett, a test of faith could easily be portrayed as an act of apostasy. For the next 2 years, from 1305 to 1307, Philip's agents work in secret. They quietly compile a dossier, collecting more evidence, probably from other disgruntled or coerced witnesses. They lay the legal groundwork. They prepare the propaganda that will be unleashed on the public the moment the arrests are made. All the while, the Templars themselves remain blissfully unaware. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, even comes to France to meet with the Pope and the King to discuss plans for a new crusade. He has no idea he's walking into a trap. While he dines with Philip and discusses the future of the Holy Land, the King's secret police are finalizing the warrants for his arrest and the complete annihilation of his order. The whispers in the palace have solidified into a deadly, unalterable plan. The conspiratorial quiet of the palace dissolves into the pre-dawn chill of a specific, fateful day. The air is cold and damp. You are back in the streets of Paris, but the familiar morning sounds are absent. There's no rumble of merchants' carts, no cheerful calls of bakers. Instead, a tense, unnatural silence hangs over the city, broken only by the distant, rhythmic tramp of marching feet. The date is Friday, October 13th, Yao. You are swept up in a tide of men moving with grim, silent purpose. They are the king's men, royal sergeants and bailiffs, their faces illuminated by the flickering orange light of torches. They move not as a single army, but in dozens of small groups, each with a specific destination. They are spreading out across Paris, and you realize with a jolt that this is happening everywhere. In this moment, all across the Kingdom of France, from the bustling port of Marseille to the quietest rural Preceptor Y in Normandy, the same scene is playing out. It is a masterclass in coordination, a stunning display of the power of Philip's centralized bureaucracy. You follow one group as they arrive at the main gate of the Paris temple. The fortress looks dark and imposing in the gloom, a sleeping giant. The king's men bang on the heavy wooden door. After a moment, a sleepy-looking Templar guard opens a small viewing grate. He sees the royal insignia and, having no reason to suspect the king he so recently sheltered, he opens the gate. There is no battle. There is no heroic resistance. The Templars are soldiers, but they are not at war with the King of France. They are caught completely, utterly by surprise. The royal agents pour into the compound. You follow them as they swarm through the dormitories, dragging drowsy, confused knights and sergeants from their beds. One of them is an old man, with a long white beard and a look of stunned disbelief on his face. This is Jacques de Molay, the 23rd and final Grand Master of the Knights Templar. Just days before, he had been an honored guest at the royal court, serving as a pallbearer at the funeral of Philip's sister-in-law. Now he is a prisoner hustled out of his own bedchambers in his nightshirt, his dignity stripped away in an instant. The Templars offer no resistance. Why would they? They are a religious order, loyal subjects of the king. They assume this must be some kind of terrible mistake, a misunderstanding that will surely be cleared up once the king realizes what his overzealous officials have done. They go willingly, their confusion greater than their fear. They are marched out of their fortress, their white mantles now looking like shrouds in the torchlight, and lead through the waking streets of Paris to the king's prisons. This is where the term Unlucky Friday, the 13th, is often said to originate. While the superstition connecting the day and date is likely much older, the dramatic simultaneous arrests of the Templars on this specific day certainly cemented its reputation in popular culture as a day of doom and misfortune. It's a historical debate that pops up every time the date appears on the calendar. Did the Templars' arrest create the superstition, or did Philip's men, with a dark sense of irony, choose this day because it was already considered unlucky? We'll likely never know for sure, but it adds another layer of legend to the event. As the sun rises over Paris, the scope of the operation becomes clear. Every single Templar in France, from the highest-ranking knight to the lowliest stable hand, has been arrested. All of their property, every castle, every farm, every Preceptor Y, has been seized by royal officials. Inventories are being taken. The king's men are already searching for the Templars' legendary treasure. They break into the vaults expecting to find mountains of gold and silver. A fun and, for Philip, deeply frustrating fact, they don't find it. They find the French royal treasury, which they were already guarding, and plenty of ledgers and deeds for land. But the vast, liquid wealth of the order, its supposed secret hoard, is nowhere to be found. It seems to have vanished into thin air, a mystery that will fuel treasure hunts for the next 700 years. By mid-morning, the second phase of the plan kicks in. Royal agents spread out across the city, reading a royal proclamation to the bewildered crowds. The document, crafted by Dino Garrett and his team, is a masterpiece of propaganda. It doesn't just announce the arrests. It justifies them in the most lurid terms possible. It tells the people of France that these knights, so long admired, are in fact monsters. They are heretics, idolaters, blasphemers who spit on the cross and deny Christ. They are accused of depravity and of betraying Christendom. The shock is palpable. The king has not just arrested his bankers, he has launched war for the soul of his kingdom, and the first decisive blow has been struck not with a sword, but with a warrant and a well-told lie. The shock of the arrest still hangs heavy in the Parisian air. You are no longer on the streets but are instead huddled in a crowded public square, listening as a royal official, his voice ringing with practiced indignation, reads from a long scroll of parchment. This is the official list of charges against the Knights Templar. A document that has been meticulously prepared and is now being disseminated throughout France to shape public opinion. As you listen, the accusations pile up, each one more shocking and sensational than the last. The list is long, numbering over 100 individual charges, but they can be boiled down to a few core themes, designed for maximum psychological impact. The first and most devastating is the charge of heresy and blasphemy. The official claims that during their secret initiation ceremony, every new Templar was forced to deny Jesus Christ as the Savior. Not once, but 3 times. Then, as the ultimate act of contempt, they were commanded to spit, trample, or even urinate on a crucifix. You can hear the gasps from the crowd around you. This is the foundational accusation, the one from which all others flow. In a deeply pious society, this is the equivalent of a spiritual nuclear bomb. Next comes the charge of idolatry. The official's voice lowers, becoming more conspiratorial. He speaks of a mysterious idol that the Templars are said to worship in their secret chapter meetings. He describes it as a head, sometimes with 1 face, sometimes with 3. He gives it a name that no one has ever heard before, Baphomet. He claims this head has the power to make them rich and make the trees flower. The description is deliberately vague, allowing people's imaginations to run wild. Is it a demon? A pagan god? A mummified head of a former master? This single exotic accusation adds a layer of black magic and occultist to the proceedings, transforming the Templars from mere heretics into satanic conspirators. Then the accusations turn to institutionalized depravity. The prosecutor alleges that the obscene, ritualistic kiss mentioned by the informant Esqui U.D. Floyeran was not just on the mouth, but on the navel, the base of the spine, and other indecent places. He claims that the order encourages and sanctions homosexual practices among the brothers, framing the intense, all-male environment of the preceptor, as a hotbed of sin. This charge was a particularly nasty piece of work, designed to exploit public prejudice and disgust, turning the Templars' vow of chastity on its head. A fascinating and often overlooked charge is that of lay absolution. The Templar chaplains were priests, but the leaders of the order, the Grand Master and the commanders of the preceptor were not. The accusation was that these laymen were claiming the priestly power to forgive the sins of the brothers under their command. To a modern ear, this might sound like a dry, theological dispute, but in the 14th century, it was a direct challenge to the power structure of the Church. It implied that the Templars saw themselves as having their own, independent line to God, cutting out the established priesthood. This, in its own way, was as threatening as spitting on the cross, as it attacked the very authority of the clerical hierarchy. Finally, there's the catch-all charge of secrecy itself. The fact that their chapter meetings were held at night behind locked doors was presented not as a measure of security or solemnity, but as definitive proof that they had something to hide. Why else would they need such privacy? The accusers argued, unless they were engaging in acts too shameful to be seen in the light of day. Their greatest strength, their discipline and discretion, was being used as the primary evidence against them. Historians today are still locked in debate over the origin of these charges. Were they a complete fabrication by Philip's propaganda machine, a cynical list of the most heinous things they could imagine? Or were they a grotesque distortion of real, but misunderstood, Templar practices? That head of Baphomet, for instance. Some scholars speculate it could have been a misunderstanding of the Templars' veneration for a relic, like the head of a saint, perhaps John the Baptist, whom they revered. Others suggest it could have been a symbolic object used in their ceremonies. One of the strangest theories is that the word Baphomet, when written in Hebrew and run through a specific cipher, the Atbash cipher spells Sophia, the Greek word for wisdom, hinting at some Gnostic influence. This is, of course, highly speculative and a favorite topic for conspiracy theorists. But for the average person standing in the square next to you, these nuances don't matter. What they hear is a terrifying, believable story. The king has uncovered a secret evil, a cancer within the heart of Christendom. The charges are so extreme, so detailed, they feel like they must be true. Who could possibly make all this up? The ground has been perfectly prepared. The public has been shocked into submission. Now, all that's left is to get the Templars themselves to admit to it. The damning accusations echo in your ears, but you are pulled away from the public squares of Paris. Your perspective shifts traveling south, across the Alps, to the city of Poitiers in western France. Here, in a temporary papal court, resides a man who is now in the most unenviable position in all of Christendom. He is Pope Clement V, and he is furious, not because he believes the charges against the Templars, but because he has just been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. You see him, a man plagued by ill health, rumored to be stomach cancer, his face etched with worry. He was born Bertrand de Gaulle, a Frenchman, and his election to the papacy was heavily backed by King Philip. In fact, he was so close to Philip that he had not yet even traveled to Rome, preferring to hold his court in France. This has led many to call him Philip's poodle, puppet pope. But Clement is a keen lawyer by training. He is intelligent, and he understands power. He knows that what Philip has just done is a brazen assault on papal authority. The Knights Templar, like all major religious orders, are directly answerable only to the Pope. They are, in a very real sense, the Pope's private army. For a secular king to arrest them, seize their property, and accuse them of heresy without consulting the Holy See is a declaration of war. It's as if the governor of Texas had arrested the entire FBI without telling the president. Clement knows he has to respond, and fast, or his authority will be permanently crippled. He immediately dispatches two cardinals to Paris with a strongly worded letter to Philip. He demands that the king hand over all the prisoners and their property to the church. This is a papal investigation, he insists, and it will be conducted by papal authority. You can almost feel the political chess match beginning. Philip, anticipating this, makes a clever move. He temporarily suspends the interrogations being run by his own men and makes a show of cooperation. He sends a delegation of his ministers to Clement, along with a carefully selected group of over 70 Templars who have, under circumstances we will soon explore, already confessed. Imagine the scene. Clement sits on his papal throne, and these knights are brought before him. One by one, they repeat their confessions. They tell him about denying Christ, about spitting on the cross, about the obscene kisses. They are coached, they are terrified, and they stick to the script. For Clement, this is a disaster. He had hoped to find the charges baseless and reassert his authority. But now he has Templars confessing to heresy right in front of him. His hands are tied. If he simply dismisses their confessions, Philip can accuse him of being a protector of heretics, a charge that could potentially get a pope deposed. This is where Clement makes a fateful decision. He feels he has no choice but to take the investigation seriously. In November 1307, he issues a papal bull, an official edict, titled Pastoralis Praeeminentiae. You watch as the scribes hastily copy it for dispatch across Europe. This bull orders all the Christian monarchs of Europe to do exactly what Philip has done, to arrest the Templars in their own lands and to seize their assets on behalf of the Church. On the surface, it looks like Clement is caving to Philip, validating his actions. But in reality, it's a brilliant, albeit desperate, legal maneuver. By issuing the bull, Clement is wresting control of the entire process away from Philip and making it an official, church-run, international affair. He is trying to turn Philip's French Inquisition into a papal investigation. It's a huge gamble, and here's a little-known fact that shows just how varied the response was. Outside of France, the bull was met with a mix of obedience and deep skepticism. In England, King Edward I initially refused to believe the charges, writing that they were unheard of, undetestable. In Aragon, the Templars simply barricaded themselves in their castles and fought back, leading to a series of lengthy sieges. In Germany, the head of the Templar order, in a dramatic scene, appeared before a synod of bishops with 20 of his knights in full armor and declared their innocence, and the bishops acquitted them. It's clear that nobody outside of Philip's sphere of influence really believed the story. But in France, it's too late. The damage is done. Clement is now trapped. He has sanctioned the arrests, and he has launched his own investigation. He hopes he can ensure a fair trial, that he can get to the bottom of what's really going on. But he is dealing with King Philip the Fair, a man who does not leave things to chance. The Pope may be the technical head of the investigation, but the king still holds the most important cards, the prisoners themselves. And in the dark, damp dungeons of the royal prisons, a machine is already at work, a machine designed not to find the truth, but to manufacture it. Clement is trying to play by the rules of canon law, while Philip is playing a much older, darker game. The delicate, high-stakes political maneuvering of the papal court fades away, and you are plunged into darkness. The air is cold, foul, and thick with the smell of despair. You are in a royal dungeon in Paris, one of the places where the arrested Templars are being held. The only light comes from a single, sputtering torch held by a grim-faced man in a leather apron. This is the world of the interrogator, and you are about to witness the grim reality behind confessions that so troubled Pope Clement. The man being questioned is a Templar sergeant. He is not a high-ranking knight, just an ordinary brother, perhaps a man who managed to farm or worked as a blacksmith. He is stripped to the waist, his hands bound. At first, he denies everything. He is a good Christian. He loves Christ. He would never spit on the cross. The interrogators, agents of the king acting under the authority of the Grand Inquisitor of France, are patient. They have their script, the list of official charges, and they have their methods. They begin with psychological pressure. They tell him that his brothers have already confessed. They tell him the Grand Master himself, Jacques de Molay, has admitted to everything. They lie, telling him that the king knows all and simply wants him to confirm the truth to save his soul. When he still refuses, the physical persuasion begins. You witness the application of what was euphemistically called the question. The most common method used on the Templars was the strap padu. The man's hands are tied behind his back, and the rope is slung over a beam in the ceiling. He is then hoisted into the air, dislocating his shoulders with an agonizing crack. He is left hanging there, the full weight of his body tearing at his shoulder sockets. He screams, he pleads, but the questions continue. Did you deny Christ? Did you worship the head? If that doesn't work, they move on to other techniques. One of the most horrific, and one we know was used on the Templars from later testimony, was torture by fire. The man is tied to a chair. His bare feet are locked into an iron frame, a sort of medieval boot. The soles of his feet are then greased with animal fat. A brazier of hot coals is brought close, and his feet are slowly roasted. The pain is unimaginable. The goal is not just to cause pain, but to break the human spirit, to reduce a man to a state where he will say anything to make it stop. Under this kind of duress, the sergeant breaks. Sobbing, delirious with pain, he confesses. Yes, he admits he denied Christ. Yes, he spat on the cross, or near it anyway. The interrogator, holding a quill, carefully records the confession, often embellishing it to fit the official narrative. Did you worship an idol? The interrogator asks. The man, confused, probably has no idea what he's talking about. A cat. The interrogator might suggest, preying on old peasant superstitions about cats and witchcraft. Yes, a cat, the broken man whispers, and so it is written down. The confession is then read back to him, and he is made to sign it or make his mark. This process was repeated, with minor variations, all across France. It was a confession factory. A bizarre and chilling little fact is that the interrogators were meticulous record keepers. We have many of these confessions today preserved in the Vatican archives. You can read the transcripts. You see the same pattern, over and over again. An initial denial, followed by a sudden detailed confession that conveniently matches the official charges almost perfectly. The records even note when a prisoner was put to the question. In Paris alone, at least 36 Templars died during or shortly after their interrogation. They were not executed, they were tortured to death. This raises a profound question that historians and legal scholars still grapple with. Can a confession obtained under torture ever be considered valid evidence? In the 14th century, the theory was that no one would confess to a mortal sin like heresy and risk eternal damnation unless it were true. Torture was seen as a tool to break through the lies and get to a truth that was already presumed. We now understand the grim reality of human psychology. Extreme pain obliterates truth. It creates compliance. The Templars weren't confessing to what they had done. They were confessing to what the interrogators wanted to hear. You see the old, weary face of Grand Master Jacques de Molay. He too was subjected to this pressure. We don't know the exact details of his torture, but we know he confessed. This was Philip's greatest prize. With the Grand Master's confession in hand, the case against the order seemed unassailable. The machine was working perfectly. It was producing exactly what the king needed, a mountain of self-incriminating evidence, written in the words of the Templars themselves, signed in their own hand and sealed by their suffering. The truth had become irrelevant. All that mattered was the confession. The grim, suffocating atmosphere of the torture chamber recedes, but the words extracted there hang in the air. Specifically, one word: Baphomet. You find yourself in a quieter, more academic setting, a library perhaps, where anxious scholars and clerics appointed by the Pope are poring over the confession transcripts. They are trying to make sense of the most bizarre and sensational part of the whole affair, the worship of this mysterious head. As you sift through the documents with them, you realize the descriptions of this idol are wildly inconsistent. It's the kind of inconsistency that screams of coached or imagined testimony rather than a description of a real, uniform object. One Templar, under duress, describes it as a grotesque head with a long beard and sparkling eyes. Another claims it has 3 faces. A third says it's the head of a woman. Some say it's made of wood, others of polished metal, maybe silver or gold. A Templar in the south of France confesses they worship a cat. A black cat, naturally. In some testimonies, the head is called Baphomet, a name that seems to appear from nowhere and has no clear etymology. In others, it's just the head, le chef in French. This head becomes the centerpiece of the prosecution's case for idolatry. It's the physical proof of their satanic leanings. The interrogators are obsessed with it. Tell us about the head is a recurring question in the transcripts. They want details. What did it look like? What did you do with it? Did you kiss it? Did it speak to you? The Templars, desperate to satisfy their torturers, provide a jumble of contradictory answers, pulling from local folklore, religious art, and sheer, pain-fueled imagination. This is where you encounter one of history's most enduring mysteries and a playground for conspiracy theorists. What, if anything, was Baphomet? The academic world is still deeply divided. The most straightforward, and widely accepted, historical explanation is that it was a complete fabrication by Philip's regime. They needed an idol to make the heresy charge stick, so they invented one. The name Baphomet itself is a puzzle. The most plausible theory is that it was a French corruption of Mahomet, the name for the Prophet Muhammad. The propagandists were likely tapping into a common, ignorant Christian belief at the time that Muslims were idol worshippers. By linking the Templars to Mahomet, they were accusing them of secretly converting to the religion of their enemies, the ultimate act of betrayal for a crusading order. But the more speculative, and frankly more interesting, theories are far more elaborate. As mentioned before, there's the Gnostic Sophia theory. Then there are those who believe the Templars really did have a head, but that it was a holy relic. The most famous candidate is the head of John the Baptist. The Templars had a special veneration for St. John. Another, even more famous, candidate is the Shroud of Turin. Some theories propose that the head was not a sculpture but a container holding the folded shroud, so that only the face of the man of the shroud was visible. This is where you veer from academic history into the realm of faith and legend. But it demonstrates how the Templar mystery can absorb other great historical puzzles. A particularly strange and specific piece of evidence, or lack thereof, is that despite seizing every single Templar property in France and conducting meticulous inventories, Philip's agents never found such a head. Note 1. If this was a central part of the order's worship, present in every commandery, you would expect them to find hundreds. They found processional crosses, they found relics of saints, they found liturgical books, but they never found a single Baphomet. The prosecution claimed the Templars were just too cunning and had hidden them all before their arrests, a convenient but improbable explanation. The image of Baphomet as we know it today, the winged, goat-headed, androgynous figure with a torch between its horns, has absolutely nothing to do with the 14th century trials. That image was created in 1856 by a French occultist named Eliphas Levi. He drew it as a symbol of his own esoteric philosophy, combining elements from various traditions. He simply borrowed the name Baphomet from the Templar trials because it sounded mysterious and occult. So every time you see that famous goat-headed figure associated with the Templars, you're looking at a 19th century invention being retroactively applied to a 14th century mystery. Back in the library, the papal investigators are just as confused as you are. The testimonies are a mess. They point not to a coherent, organized cult, but to the chaos of forced confessions, but the damage is done. The idea of Baphomet is too powerful to seductive. It has taken root in the public imagination. It transforms the trial from a complex legal and financial dispute into a simple, terrifying story of good versus evil, of Christian knights versus a demonic talking head. It's the ultimate fake news, and it's working perfectly. The confusing, spectral image of Baphomet fades, and you focus on a single living man. You are in a vaulted chamber of the Paris Temple, which has been converted into a makeshift courtroom. The man sitting before a panel of cardinals and royal officials is old, probably in his late 60s, which was a significant age for the 14th century. He looks tired, worn down, and defeated. This is Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, the leader of the entire Templar Order. The fate of his knights, and his own, rests heavily on his stooped shoulders. De Molay is a man caught between worlds. He was a warrior, a veteran of the failed campaigns in the Holy Land. He spent his life in the rigid, masculine, military world of the Order. He was not a scholar, a diplomat, or a politician. By all accounts, he was a man of average intelligence but immense personal piety and bravery. He was in essence an old soldier, completely unprepared for the sophisticated, cynical legal trap that Philip the Fair had laid for him. He had been held in the king's prisons for weeks, subjected to the same pressures as his men. We don't have a record of his torture, but it is almost certain he was threatened with it, if not subjected to it directly. His interrogators would have used psychological torment, telling him that hundreds of his knights had already confessed and that his stubbornness was only damning them further. They would have offered him a deal: confess, and the king might be merciful. The Pope would intervene. The order might be reformed, not destroyed. And so, on October 24th, 1307, just 11 days after his arrest, Jacques de Molay confessed. He stood before the university masters of Paris and admitted that the initiation ceremony was flawed. He confessed to the denial of Christ and the spitting on the cross. He was careful in his wording. He claimed that these acts were indeed part of the ceremony, but that they were done not with the heart, but with the mouth only, suggesting it was a symbolic act, not a true renunciation of faith. He vehemently denied the charges of sodomy and idolatry. It was a partial, curated confession, likely the result of a desperate attempt to find a middle ground that would satisfy his captors without completely dishonoring his faith. The next day he was brought before the formal commission again, and he repeated his confession. You can see the relief on the faces of the king's men. This is their ultimate victory. The Grand Master himself has admitted to the central charge. They immediately had his confession copied and sent to Pope Clement as proof. This was the confession that so shocked the Pope and forced his hand. But here's a fascinating and heartbreaking little detail. De Molay was illiterate. Like many noblemen of his time, he was trained for battle, not for books. He couldn't read the document that was written down for him. He had to rely on his captors to accurately record what he said. How much of his nuanced with the mouth, not the heart defense, was lost or deliberately omitted in the official transcript, we will never know. He authorized the confession, believing it was the only way to save his order and his men from the torture machine. He likely believed he was making a strategic sacrifice. The debate among historians over de Molay's character is intense. Was he a weak leader who buckled under pressure, betraying his entire order with a false confession? Or was he a pragmatic, if naive, old man trying to navigate an impossible situation, hoping to save his institution by admitting to lesser charges and pleading for reform? Some have criticized him for not immediately choosing martyrdom, for not defying Philip from the very beginning. Others see him as a tragic figure, a simple soldier, outmaneuvered by a master political manipulator, who made the best choice he could with the terrible options available to him. For now, his confession has a devastating effect on the morale of the other Templars. The news spreads through the prison network. The Grand Master has confessed. For many of the knights who had been holding out, resisting the torture, this is the final blow. If their leader has admitted guilt, what hope is there for them? What is the point of their continued suffering? Many of them give up and confess, often just repeating the story they are told their Grand Master has validated. De Molay, in his attempt to save the order, has inadvertently become the prosecution's most powerful weapon, the final piece of the machine needed to legitimize the entire affair. He sits in his cell, a prisoner of the king, having given Philip exactly what he needed, and is likely unaware of the storm his words have just unleashed. The despair of de Molay's prison cell fades, replaced by a flicker of something that has been absent for a long time: hope. We are in the year 1309. Pope Clement V, having finally wrestled a degree of control back from King Philip, has succeeded in launching his own independent papal commissions. These are not the brutal, state-run inquisitons of the king's men. These are church-led hearings designed to listen to the Templars' side of the story. You find yourself in a large hall in Paris, a space designated for one of these papal hearings. The atmosphere is completely different. The instruments of torture are gone. The interrogators are not royal thugs, but high-ranking bishops and cardinals appointed by the Pope. They are theologians and canon lawyers, tasked with finding the actual truth, not just confirming a predetermined narrative. For the first time since their arrest 2 years earlier, the Templars are being given a chance to speak freely without the immediate threat of the strap-patu or the brazier. And they speak. At first, it's a trickle. A few brave knights come forward to defend the order. Then as word spreads through the prisons that this is a safe forum, the trickle becomes a flood. You watch as hundreds of Templars, many of them looking gaunt and bearing the scars of their previous interrogations, line up to testify. It's a stunning act of collective courage. They are risking everything. They are, in effect, calling the King of France a liar and his entire legal system a sham. One knight after another stands before the papal commissioners and recontests their previous confessions. They tell the bishops how those confessions were obtained. One knight, Aimé de Villiers-le-Duc, provides a harrowing account. He tells the commissioners, "I confessed to some of the charges because of the torture inflicted on me. I was held in a pit for 36 days with my hands tied behind my back, in great pain and mortal danger." He shows them the scars. Another knight describes how he saw 36 of his brothers die in the torments and how he would have confessed to anything, even to killing God himself, just to make the pain stop. The stories pour out, painting a consistent, undamning picture of Philip's investigation. They talk about the psychological pressure, the starvation, the constant threats against their lives and families. A key theme emerges. They weren't bold that the Grand Master had confessed and that they must do the same. This coordinated defense is being organized from within the prisons. A few educated knights, like Ponsard D.D., Isy and Pierre de Boulogne, who were trained lawyers themselves, act as legal counsel for the others. They draft formal defenses, arguing that the order is pure and holy and that the confessions are null and void because they were extracted by force. For a moment, it feels like the tide is turning. The sheer volume of these recantations is staggering. Nearly 600 Templars in the Paris hearings alone come forward to defend the order. They offer a unified, coherent narrative that directly contradicts the king's case. They challenge the commissioners to look at the evidence logically. If the order was truly a heretical cult, how could it have functioned for nearly 200 years, attracting pious men and earning the trust of popes and kings? They demand to be heard in a fair trial, to be able to call witnesses and present evidence. Here's a small but powerful detail of their defense. They point to the way they died. They remind the commissioners of their brothers who fought to the last man in the Holy Land. They ask, would men who deny Christ die for the cross with such devotion? It's a potent, emotional argument that highlights the massive contradiction at the heart of the accusations. These were men who had literally dedicated their lives and often given their lives in the service of the very faith they were now accused of defiling. The papal commissioners are visibly moved. They are canon lawyers, and they understand the concept of a coerced confession. The evidence being presented to them overwhelmingly suggests that the initial investigation was a corrupt and brutal farce. Their reports back to Pope Clement are cautious, but you can read between the lines. They are finding very little credible evidence to support the original charges. It seems that the Pope's strategy of taking over the investigation might actually work. A wave of fragile optimism spreads among the imprisoned knights. Perhaps justice is still possible. Perhaps the truth will come out. Perhaps the Holy Father will see through the king's lies and restore the honor of the temple. The defense is bold, it is brave, and for a brief, shining moment, it seems like it might just be enough. The cautious optimism of the papal hearing room blossoms for a fleeting moment into what feels like a genuine chance at vindication. You remain with the papal commission through the spring of 1310. The momentum is clearly on the side of the Templars. The defense, led by the brilliant and courageous priest knight Pierre de Boulogne, is becoming more organized, more confident. He is acting like a modern defense attorney, systematically dismantling the prosecution's case. He presents the commissioners with a formal, written defense. It's a powerful document. He argues, point by point, that the charges are not only false but absurd. He highlights the Templars' long history of pious service, their charity, and their martyrdom in the East. He attacks the credibility of the initial accusers, painting them as disgruntled criminals and perjurers. Most powerfully, he challenges the very legality of Philip's initial action. He argues that by arresting the Templars, the King of France committed a sacrilegious act against a sacred order, making the entire proceeding invalid from the start. The commissioners are listening. The sheer number of knights retracting their confessions is having an effect. You see it in the tenor of the questions, which become less accusatory and more genuinely inquisitive. They are no longer just asking about Baphomet. They are asking about the Templars' daily routines, their charitable works, their financial records. They are conducting a real investigation. The star witness for the defense is, ironically, not present. It is the order itself, its history and reputation. Pierre de Boulogne calls a character witness in the form of the Templar Roll, their book of regulations. He has it read aloud to the commission. The commissioners hear the strict rules governing every aspect of a Templar's life, the required prayers, the fasting, the prohibitions against gambling and fine clothes, the absolute vow of obedience. The document radiates piety and discipline, a stark contrast to the lurid tales of debauchery and devil worship. A small but telling piece of evidence they present is the sheer logistical absurdity of the charges. The prosecution claims that these heretical practices were universal throughout the order. The defense lawyers ask how. How could an organization with thousands of members spread across a dozen kingdoms, from Scotland to Cyprus, maintain such a radical, secret conspiracy for almost 2 centuries without anyone ever finding out until a single informant appeared? How could they ensure that every single initiation in every remote preceptor followed the same blasphemous script? It defied logic. The conspiracy was, in a way, too perfect to be believable. This period, from late 1309 to the spring of 1310, represents the absolute high point of the Templar defense. It's the one moment in this whole tragic story where things could have gone the other way. Pope Clement was receiving the reports from his commissioners. He was also under immense political pressure from other monarchs, like the King of England, who were finding no evidence of heresy in their own, less violent, investigations. The legal case against the Templars, when examined under the calm light of canon law, was falling apart. You can feel the change in the air, a shift in the legal and political landscape. The Templars in the Paris prisons, despite their grim conditions, are buoyed by a sense of hope. They believe they are winning. They have faced their accusers, they have told their truths, and they believe the Church will protect them. Jacques de Molay himself, hearing of the brave defenses men are mounting, finds a renewed sense of courage. He sends word to the commission that he is ready to speak again, this time to defend the order and retract his own coerced confession. He feels he has a duty to stand with his men. The king's men, led by the ever-watchful Guillaume de Nogaret, are observing all of this with growing alarm. Their perfectly orchestrated plan is unraveling. The papal commission is not behaving as they had hoped. It is not rubber-stamping their findings, but is instead exposing their methods. The narrative is slipping from their control. For King Philip, this is an intolerable situation. He did not go to all this trouble just to have a group of priests declare him wrong. He is not a man who tolerates losing. As you watch the Templars celebrate a small legal victory, a sense of dread begins to creep in. The hope feels fragile, glassy. You know that Philip the Fair is not going to let his entire case, and with it his reputation and his finances, be destroyed by something as trivial as the truth. A countermove is coming, and it will be swift, brutal, and decisive. The fragile hope of the papal courtroom shatters with the force of a battering ram. The legal arguments, the impassioned testimonies, the careful work of the commissioners, It all becomes utterly irrelevant in a single, horrific act of royal power. You are no longer in the relative safety of the hearing. You are outside the city walls of Paris, in a field near the Port Saint-Antoine. The date is May 12th, Yosan Yolin. The air is filled with the smell of burning wood and something else, something sickeningly sweet and acrid. A large crowd has gathered. Their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity, fear, and pious satisfaction. In the center of the field, dozens of wooden stakes have been driven into the ground. Bound to these stakes are 54 men. They are Templar Knights. You recognize some of their faces. These are the leaders of the defense. These are the men who had been bravely and eloquently organizing the recantation as the ones who had testified before the Papal Commission, the ones who had dared to hope. What has happened? King Philip and his Chancellor, Dino Garrett, have executed a masterful and terrifying legal maneuver. They have bypassed the Pope's commission entirely. They found a friendly Archbishop, Philippe A. de Marigny, a man loyal to the king, and had him convened his own local diocesan court. This court moved with lightning speed. Their logic was simple and brutal. These 54 Templars had previously confessed to heresy. They had now, before the Papal Commission, retracted those confessions. Therefore, under the laws of the Inquisition, they were not just heretics, but relapsed heretics, a crime for which there was no appeal and for which the punishment was immediate death by burning. It was a legal checkmate. They weren't being executed for being Templars. They were being executed for changing their testimony. Philip wasn't technically interfering with the Pope's investigation into the order. He was simply punishing a group of convicted heretics who had fallen back into their error. It was a cynical, vicious, but legally airtight move within the twisted framework of inquisitorial law. You watch in horror as the pyres are lit. The knights begin to pray, their voices rising in a ragged chorus of hymns and appeals to God. They do not scream for mercy. They do not recant their recantation as. They face their deaths with a stoicism and courage that stuns the crowd into silence. The flames lick at their feet, then engulf them. Jacques de Molay, still in his prison cell, can reportedly see the glow of the fires from his window. A key historical detail, recorded by a chronicler at the scene, is that the knights showed such fortitude in the flames that the crowd was deeply moved. They died so bravely and with such good grace, the chronicler wrote, that it caused much admiration and great surprise in all who saw it. They died proclaiming their innocence and the purity of their order until the smoke and flames finally silenced them. They did not die like guilty men. They died like martyrs. The message this sends is brutally effective. It's not aimed at the public. It's aimed at every other Templar languishing in Philip's prisons. The message is this: the Papal Commission cannot protect you. If you retract your confession, this is your fate. Your only hope for survival is to stick to your original story. It's a masterstroke of terror. The organized defense of the Templars collapses overnight. Who would dare to speak out now, knowing that the price of telling the truth was to be burned alive? The stream of knights wanting to testify before the Papal Commission dries up completely. Pierre de Boulogne, the brilliant lawyer knight who had led the defense, vanishes from the historical record. It is presumed he was either thrown into a dungeon for the rest of his life or quietly disposed of. The Papal Commissioners are shocked and powerless. They protest, but what can they do? The king's men have acted within the letter of the law, however cruel. The wind has been knocked out of their investigation. They now have no one willing to testify for the defense. All they are left with are the original, coerced confessions. Historians are divided on Philip's personal motivation here. Was this the cold, calculated act of a tyrant eliminating his opposition? Or did he, in his own mind, genuinely believe these men were heretics and that he was doing God's work by sending them to the stake? This question of his piety versus his pragmatism is a central debate. But regardless of his motive, the result is the same. He has broken the will of the Templars. He has intimidated the Church. He has seized back control of the narrative through the most theatrical and terrifying means possible. The brief, hopeful spring of 1310 is over, and a cold, grim winter has descended upon the fate of the order. The smoke from the Parisian pyres dissipates, but its chilling effect lingers. The momentum of the trial has irrevocably shifted. You now travel southeast, to the small city of Vigny, nestled in the foothills of the Alps. The year is 1311. Pope Clement V has convened a great general council of the Church here. This is a massive event, a gathering of hundreds of cardinals, bishops, archbishops, and theological experts from all across Christendom. Its official purpose is to discuss church reform and a new crusade, but everyone knows the real reason they are here, to finally decide the fate of the Knights Templar. You find yourself an observer in the bustling cathedral where the council meetings are held. The atmosphere is tense and political. Pope Clement had hoped this council would be his instrument to finally ensure a fair, deliberative process. He had commanded that Templar representatives be allowed to come to Vigny to present their defense before the entire assembled body of the Church. It was his last, best hope for a just resolution. And then, a moment of high drama. Just as the council is about to begin discussing the Templars, a group of 7 knights, fully armed and looking resolute, appear unannounced at the gates of the city. They claim to be representatives for the nearly 2,000 Templars, still alive in prisons and hiding throughout Europe. They have come to do what the Pope invited them to do, to defend their order before the council. Panic ensues. This is the one thing King Philip cannot allow. He cannot risk a live, public defense in front of the most powerful men in the Church. The story of the 50 for burning martyrs has spread, and many of the bishops from outside of France are deeply skeptical of the king's case. If these knights are allowed to speak, they might sway the council. Philip, who is not at the council himself but is nearby with his army, sends a furious message to the Pope. Clement, under immense pressure and fearing the king might just march his army into Vigny, makes a difficult choice. He has the 7 brave knights arrested and imprisoned. The defense of the Templar order has been silenced before it could even begin. With the defense out of the way, the council begins its deliberations. And a fascinating thing happens. The majority of the bishops are not convinced of the Templars' guilt. The evidence presented by the prosecution, mostly the coerced confessions from France, is weak and contradictory. When compared with the findings from their own dioceses in Spain, Germany, and Italy, where the Templars were largely found innocent, the case looks incredibly thin. The council fathers vote, and the result is a stunning rebuke to King Philip. A special commission of bishops votes overwhelmingly against abolishing the order on the grounds of the evidence presented. They recommend further investigation and allowing the order to reform. This is Clement's worst nightmare. The council is defying him and, by extension, defying the King of France. Philip is furious. He is not a man who takes no for an answer. In March of 1312, in a move of pure political intimidation, Philip the Fair himself rides into Vigny, flanked by his sons and a powerful military escort. He marches into the town and essentially puts the entire council under armed guard. The message is crystal clear. You will give me the result I want. Now Pope Clement is truly trapped. He has a council that refuses to condemn the Templars and the king, with an army at his door demanding their destruction. He has to find a way out. And he does, with a piece of legal and political jiu-jitsu that is as clever as it is tragic. He reconvenes the council for a special session. King Philip is there, in person, a brooding, powerful presence. Clement gets up to speak. He announces that he is not going to rule on the guilt or innocence of the Templar order. The legal process, he says, is too complicated and will take too long. Instead, he is going to make an administrative decision, not a judicial one. He invokes his absolute papal authority to act for the good of the Church. He declares that because of the scandal, because of the shocking accusations, whether true or not, because of the king's fierce opposition, the order of the Knights Templar has become too damaged to continue. Its reputation is ruined. It can no longer effectively serve its purpose. Therefore, he announces, not by definitive sentence, but by apostolic provision, he is suppressing the order. It's a crucial distinction. He isn't finding them guilty. He is dissolving them for pragmatic reasons. It's like a company being shut down not because it broke the law, but because a PR scandal has made it impossible for it to do business. This allows Clement to save face he isn't caving on the legal merits, and it gives Philip what he wants, the end of the Templars. The council fathers, under the watchful eye of the king's soldiers, have little choice but to assent. The fate of one of the most powerful institutions in Christendom is sealed not with a verdict, but with a political compromise. The grand, tense assembly of a council of any dissolves. The bishops and cardinals packed their bags and head home, their minds filled with the uneasy compromise they were forced to witness. Your focus now shifts from the high drama of church politics to the dry, bureaucratic process of dismantling a multinational corporation. The papal bull Vox in Excelso has been issued on March 22, Yelsanyar. It is the official death warrant of the Knights Templar. But killing an organization this large and wealthy is not as simple as signing a piece of paper. The bull itself is a masterpiece of careful wording. Pope Clement, still trying to walk the tightrope, explicitly states that he is not condemning the order based on a guilty verdict. He writes that although the legal process did not allow for a formal sentence against them, the scandals, suspicion, and loud accusations have caused grave scandal to the faith and to the lands. For the good of Christendom, and to avoid further damage, the order is suppressed and perpetually prohibited, with all its lands and properties confiscated. It's a termination based on bad publicity, a truly modern-sounding concept. The next, and most important, question is a practical one. What happens to all their stuff? The Templars owned vast tracts of land, hundreds of castles and preceptories, farms, mills, vineyards, and ships across all of Europe. King Philip, naturally, assumed he would get the lion's share, at least in France. This was, after all, the main prize he had been after from the beginning. But Pope Clement had one last card to play. He issues another bull, ad providam. In this edict, he decrees that all of the Templar assets are to be transferred to their main rivals, the Knights Hospitaller, also known as the Knights of Street. John, on the surface, this made perfect sense. The hospitals were also a military order dedicated to defending Christendom. The property would, in theory, continue to be used for its original purpose. But in reality, it was a brilliant final move to thwart Philip. The king would not get his hands on the bulk of the Templar wealth directly. This, of course, led to a new round of frantic legal and political battles. Philip was livid. He argued that the transfer was unfair and that the French crown was owed an enormous sum from the Templar accounts to cover the costs of the trial and the years of administration of their properties. He and his lawyers haggled and fought with the hospitals for years. In the end, Philip did manage to extract a huge amount of cash from the deal, effectively billing the hospitals for the privilege of receiving the Templar lands. He never got the windfall he dreamed of, but he did manage to clear most of his debts to the Templars by simply seizing the money owed to him from their accounts before handing the rest over. It was a messy, greedy, and protracted affair. And what about the Templars themselves? The bull also had to decide the fate of the thousands of men who were now members of a non-existent organization. Here, a distinction was made for the vast majority of Templars outside of France, and for those in France who had confessed and remained reconciled with the Church, a form of pension was arranged. They were to be absorbed into other monastic orders or allowed to live out their days in their former preceptor, which were now owned by the hospitals. They were to be given a living stipend. They were, in effect, forced into retirement. But for the leaders, for the high-ranking knights who were considered to have been at the heart of the conspiracy, their fate remained undecided. They were to remain in the Pope's custody, to be judged by him personally. This included the Grand Master Jacques de Malay and a few of his closest commanders. They were kept in prison, their final sentence perpetually delayed. The dissolution of the order was a slow and complicated process. In some places like Portugal, the king simply refused to obey the Pope's order. Instead, he negotiated a deal. He took all the Templar assets and used them to found a new national order called the Order of Christ. A fun historical footnote. A couple of centuries later, the sails of Vasco da Gama's ships, as he sailed to India, were emblazoned with the distinctive cross of this new Order of Christ, a direct descendant of the Templar cross. The Templar legacy, in a way, helped launch the Age of Discovery. But in France, the end was brutal and complete. A 200-year-old institution, a pillar of the medieval world, had been wiped off the map. It was erased not because of a proven crime, but because its wealth and power had become a threat to a rising, centralized monarchy. The great fortress in Paris, once a symbol of Templar power, was now just another piece of royal property. The machine of the state had won. The dust of the Great Council has settled, and the lawyers are busy with the monumental task of asset transfer. But your attention is drawn to a nagging, almost tangible question that hangs in the air, a question whispered in taverns and royal courts alike. Where is the money? King Philip may have won his political victory, but the financial prize, the one he so desperately needed, proved to be frustratingly elusive. You are back with the royal officials in Paris, the ones who first stormed the temple on that fateful Friday morning in 1307. You can sense their confusion and frustration. They had expected to find vaults overflowing with gold bullion, silver coins, and precious jewels. They were acting on the popular myth of the Templars' secret treasure, a legend born of their immense, but misunderstood wealth. What they found instead was something far more complex and far less liquid. They found ledgers, and less meticulously kept ledgers, detailing loans, property deeds, and letters of credit. They found the French royal treasury, which they were already supposed to be guarding. But that was the king's own money, not a bonus. They found a sophisticated financial system, but not a pirate's chest. The Templars' wealth wasn't in a giant pile of gold in a vault in Paris. It was spread across Europe, invested in land, in agriculture, in infrastructure. Their wealth was in their system, their network, not in a single hoard. This is a crucial distinction that Philip, in his greed, seems to have overlooked. So Philip's first disappointment was realizing the treasure was mostly real estate. His second was Pope Clement's decision to grant that real estate to the hospitals. But Philip was nothing if not persistent. He embarked on a long and ugly campaign to squeeze every last liver he could from the situation. He presented the hospitals with an itemized bill. He charged them for the costs of the trial, for the pain and suffering of his investigation. He charged them for the upkeep of the Templar properties while they were in his custody. He even charged them for the cost of burning the 54 Templars in 1310. It was an audacious and deeply cynical act of extortion. After years of negotiation, the hospitals, desperate to get their hands on the properties, agreed to pay the French crown an enormous sum. So Philip got his money, but he had to fight for it, and it came from another religious order, not from a magical treasure chest. But this still doesn't account for the legend. The legend says there was a whore, then it vanished. This brings us to one of the most exciting and enduring Templar mysteries. The story goes that in the days just before the mass arrest on October 13th, the Templars must have been tipped off. The king's order was supposed to be a total secret, but it was a massive, kingdom-wide operation. It's plausible that someone talked. According to one popular theory, a train of wagons, heavily guarded, was seen leaving the Paris temple in the dead of night, just a day or two before the arrests. Where did these wagons go? The most popular destination in the lore is the main Templar port on the Atlantic coast, La Rochelle. Here, the story gets even better. The Templars maintained a large and powerful fleet of ships, which they used for trade and for transporting pilgrims and supplies to the Holy Land. At the time of the arrests, this fleet, which was docked at La Rochelle, mysteriously vanished. Philip's men arrived at the port to find it empty. Did those wagons carry the liquid assets, the gold, silver, and precious relics, from the Paris vault to the coast, where they were loaded onto the ships and sailed away to a secret destination? This is a point of intense historical debate. Skeptical historians argue there's no solid contemporary evidence for this fleeing treasure or the vanishing fleet. They suggest the fleet was probably just out at sea on routine business and that the treasure never existed in the form people imagine. But for believers in the conspiracy, this is the key moment. This is how the Templars preserved their wealth and, perhaps, themselves. Where could they have gone? The theories are a wonderful mix of history and fantasy. Some say they sailed to Portugal, where they were protected and reborn as the Order of Christ. A very popular theory, which we'll explore more later, is that they sailed to Scotland. At the time, Scotland's King Robert the Bruce was at war with England and had been excommunicated by the Pope. This made Scotland one of the few places in Europe where the Pope's order to arrest the Templars would be ignored. A fleet of veteran warrior knights with a massive amount of cash would have been a very welcome sight for him. The most outlandish and most romantic theory is that they used their advanced knowledge of maps and navigation. Some claim they had access to ancient maps and sailed across the Atlantic a full century before Columbus to what we now know as America. Proponents of this theory point to mysterious stone carvings in Massachusetts and even the famous money pit on Oak Island in Nova Scotia as evidence of the Templars' presence in the New World. Back in 14th century France, however, the reality for King Philip is one of frustrating balance sheets. He has destroyed his biggest creditor, consolidated his power, and managed to extract a hefty fee from the hospitals. But the fantastic wealth he thought he could just grab and use to solve all his problems never materialized. It slipped through his fingers, becoming something far more powerful and enduring than gold or silver, a legend. The bureaucratic wrangling over property and the thrilling hunt for phantom treasure fade into the background. Your attention is drawn back to the human cost of this tragedy, to the men who have been languishing in a royal prison for nearly 7 years. We are back in Paris. The date is March 18th, 1314. It is a grey, overcast day on the Île de la Cité, the island in the heart of the city. A platform has been erected in the square in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. A huge crowd is gathered, buzzing with anticipation. Today, the final act of the Templar saga is supposed to play out. 4 men are brought out onto the platform. They are the highest-ranking leaders of the order who survived the purges. There is Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, his beard now long and white, his body stooped from years of confinement. Beside him is Geoffroy de Charny, the preceptor of Normandy, the loyal and steadfast knight. The other 2 are high-ranking officials from Aquitaine and France. 3 papal legates, cardinals appointed by the Pope, are here to deliver the final sentence. The 4 men have been found guilty based on their original confessions. But because they have confessed and shown remorse, they will be spared the death penalty. Their sentence is to be perpetual imprisonment. It is meant to be an act of mercy, a quiet, anticlimactic end to a tumultuous story. The sentence is read aloud for all to hear. The crowd murmurs, ready to disperse. This is what everyone expected. But then, something completely unexpected happens. Jacques de Molay, the old, defeated man, finds one last reserve of strength. As the cardinals are finishing, he steps forward, his voice suddenly clear and strong, ringing out across the square. He raises his manacled hands and shouts that he is not guilty. He declares that his confession was a lie, forced from him by the pain of torture and the fear of more. He proclaims for all of God and man to hear that the Knights Templar order is pure and holy, and that he has grievously sinned only in betraying it to save his own miserable life. The crowd is stunned into silence. Then, beside him, Geoffroy de Charny finds his voice too. He joins his Grand Master, shouting his own innocence and denouncing his forced confession. It is a breathtaking moment of defiance. These 2 old men, with nothing left to lose, are choosing their honor over a few more wretched years in a dungeon. They are retracting their confessions in the most public way imaginable, effectively spitting in the king's eye. King Philip the Fair is in his palace nearby. When the news of this public recantation reaches him, his reaction is swift and volcanic. He is not just angry, he is incandescent with rage. This is the ultimate personal and political insult. De Molay has not just challenged the verdict. He has challenged the king's justice, his authority, and his narrative in front of the entire city. Philip doesn't consult with the papal legates. He doesn't convene a court. He makes an immediate decision. These men are relapsed heretics. They must burn, and they must burn today. As dusk falls, a new pyre is hastily constructed on a small, teardrop-shaped island in the middle of the Seine, the Île de Cerveau, located at the western tip of the Île de la Cité. The location is deliberate, a place where the maximum number of people from both banks of the river can watch. De Molay and de Charny are rowed out to the islet. They are tied to the stake. This is where the legend of the Templar's curse is born. According to a contemporary chronicler, as the flames began to rise, Jacques de Molay, far from screaming in agony, projected his voice one last time across the water. He proclaimed his innocence again and declared that God would avenge their wrongful death. And then he supposedly issued a specific summons. Pope Clement, King Philip, Within a year and a day, I summon you to appear before the judgment seat of God to receive your just punishment. Cursed, cursed, you shall all be cursed, the 13th generation of your race. Whether he actually said these exact words is a matter of intense historical debate. It's the kind of dramatic detail that chroniclers love, and it may have been added after the fact to make sense of what happened next. But the image is seared into the historical imagination, the last Grand Master, engulfed in flames, promising a divine and terrible retribution. He dies with a courage that, like his 54 brothers 4 years earlier, deeply impresses the Parisian crowd. He has lost his life, but in this final, fiery act, he has reclaimed his honor and cemented his place as a martyr. The king has his body, but de Molay and the legend of the Templars will have the last word. The acrid smoke from Jacques de Molay's pyre has barely cleared from the Parisian sky, but his alleged curse hangs in the air, a chilling prophecy waiting to unfold. You remain in France, a silent observer of a kingdom, still reeling from the dramatic execution. For King Philip the Fair, the matter is finished. The Templars are gone, their leaders are dead, and his authority is absolute. He returns to the business of running his kingdom, a kingdom built on ruthless efficiency and a shaky financial foundation. But the story doesn't end here. The curse, whether real or a later invention, starts to look unnervingly potent. The first of all is Pope Clement V. Just over 1 month after de Molay's execution in April 1314, Clement dies. He had been suffering for years from a painful illness, likely stomach or intestinal cancer, so his death was not entirely unexpected. However, the timing was uncanny. A bizarre and grim little anecdote surrounds his death. After he passed away, his body was laid in a church for a vigil. During the night, a powerful thunderstorm broke out. A bolt of lightning struck the church, starting a fire. The Pope's funeral bier was engulfed in flames, and by the time the fire was put out, his body was almost completely consumed. To the superstitious minds of the 14th century, this was a clear sign of divine judgment. The man who had allowed God's knights to burn had himself been burned by a fire from heaven. It was a detail too perfect for people to ignore, adding the first layer of supernatural credibility to de Molay's curse. Next, all eyes turned to the king. Philip the Fair is at the height of his power, but his personal life has been marred by scandal. In the very same year as de Molay's death, a major scandal known as the Tour de Nesla affair erupted, in which all 3 of his daughters-in-law were accused of adultery, and 2 of them were found guilty. It was a humiliating public spectacle for the royal family, but Philip himself seems robust, still relatively young at 46. Then in November 1314, less than 8 months after the execution, Philip is out hunting in the forests near his palace at Fontainebleau. He suffers a sudden accident. The exact nature of the incident is unclear. Contemporary accounts are vague. Some say he was thrown from his horse. Others claim he had a stroke or a cerebral hemorrhage while on the hunt. Whatever the cause, he is carried back to the palace, paralyzed and unable to speak. He lingers for a few weeks, his powerful body and sharp mind trapped in a failing shell, before dying at the end of the month. The death of the powerful, handsome king so soon after the Pope's, and so well within the year and a day timeline of the curse, is a stunning development. For the people of France, the connection is immediate and undeniable. The curse is real. God has rendered his verdict. This interpretation isn't just a matter of peasant superstition. It's discussed by serious chroniclers and nobles. It profoundly damages Philip's legacy, recasting him not as a great modernizing king, but as a tyrant who incurred the wrath of heaven. But the curse, as de Molay allegedly uttered it, wasn't just for Philip and Clement. It was for Philip's entire line to the 13th generation. And here the story becomes a dynasty-ending tragedy. Philip the Fair had 3 healthy, strong sons who succeeded him on the throne. It should have been the beginning of a long and stable Cape John dynasty. Instead, it was the beginning of the end. His eldest son, Louis X, reigns for only 2 years before dying suddenly. Louis's wife gives birth to a son, John I, but the infant king lives for only 5 days. The throne then passes to Philip's second son, Philip V. He reigns for 6 years and dies without a male heir. The throne then passes to the last of Philip the Fair's sons, Charles IV. He too reigns for 6 years and dies without a male heir. This rapid succession of kings, all dying young and failing to produce a direct male successor, is known as the Cape John miracle in reverse. In just 14 years, from 13 to 1328, the direct line of the House of Capet, which had ruled France for over 300 years, is completely extinguished. This succession crisis leads directly to the outbreak of the 100 Years' War, as the English king, who had a claim to the throne through his mother, Philip the Fair's daughter, contests the crown. Historians, of course, look for rational explanations, genetic issues, bad luck, the general precarity of life in the 14th century. But the Curse of the Templars provides a much more compelling and enduring narrative. It's a story of hubris and divine retribution, a cautionary tale about a king who reached too far. Whether you believe in curses or not, the historical fact remains. Within 14 years of burning the last Grand Master, the powerful king was dead, his 3 sons were dead, and his direct family line was extinct, plunging his kingdom into a century of war. The old soldier, it seems, got his revenge. The dramatic downfall of the Capian dynasty fades from view, and your focus shifts away from the heart of France to its wild, windswept Atlantic coast. You're standing on the docks of La Rochelle. This isn't the bustling, police port of Philip's kingdom anymore. It's a place alive with whispers and shadows, a key location in the birth of the Templar survival myth. We are revisiting the mystery of what happened in the days leading up to that fateful Friday the 13th. The official story is that the arrests were a complete surprise, but the sheer scale of the operation, requiring thousands of royal agents to be in position simultaneously, makes a leak seem almost inevitable. The survival myth hinges on this leak. Someone, perhaps a Templar sympathizer within the royal court, must have sent a warning. And that warning would have gone to the 2 most important places, the Paris Temple, the administrative and financial heart, and La Rochelle, the operational and naval heart. La Rochelle was the Templars' primary Atlantic port. It was from here that their ships sailed to the British Isles and beyond, and it was a crucial link in their supply chain to the Holy Land. They had built a formidable commandery here, a fortress that dominated the harbor. They had their own shipyards, warehouses, and a fleet of vessels that were the envy of many kingdoms. Now you are back in the chaos of October 1307. Royal officials, clutching their arrest warrants, storm the Templar commandery at La Rochelle. They expect to capture the knights and, more importantly, to seize their entire fleet. But when they get to the harbor, they find the docks severely empty. The main fleet is gone. The records are spotty, but the legend is potent. At least 18 Templar ships, a significant naval force, had slipped their moorings a day or 2 earlier and sailed out into the vast, gray expanse of the Atlantic, never to be seen again by the King of France. This is the lost fleet, and it's the vehicle, both literally and metaphorically, for every Templar survival theory. What was on those ships? The most obvious answer is people. Knights, sergeants, and chaplains who had been warned of the impending arrests and were fleeing for their lives. The second, more tantalizing answer is treasure. This is where the story of the wagons secretly leaving the Paris Temple connects with the vanishing fleet. The theory is that the Templars' liquid assets, the gold, silver, jewels, and perhaps even their most sacred relics and documents, were transported overland to La Rochelle, loaded onto the ships, and spirited away to safety. So, where did they go? This question is a historian's puzzle and a novelist's dream. Let's look at the plausible options first. Portugal is a strong candidate. As we know, the King of Portugal was friendly to the Templars and eventually absorbed them into a new order. Sailing south to a friendly port would have been a logical choice. But the most enduring and romantic theory points north, to a land that was, at that moment, a lawless haven for enemies of the Pope and the King of France, Scotland. You can imagine the scene on board one of those ships. The captain, a grizzled Templar sergeant, unrolls a chart on his desk. They cannot sail to England, which is allied with France. They cannot sail to most of Europe, where the Pope's bull will soon be enforced. But Scotland is different. King Robert the Bruce is at war with England. He has been excommunicated by the Pope for murdering his rival in a church. Scotland is effectively a rogue state outside the bounds of papal law. For a fleet of fugitive knights with military experience and a massive payroll, there could be no more welcoming destination. This theory forms the basis of the Scottish connection. The idea is that the Templar fleet, laden with treasure and warriors, sailed up the Irish Sea and made landfall on the west coast of Scotland in Argyll. There they made a deal with Robert the Bruce. They would offer him their funds and their formidable fighting skills in his war against the English, and in return he would give them sanctuary and a new home. A strange but intriguing piece of evidence often cited for this is the architecture of Rosslyn Chapel, a church built in Scotland in the mid-15th century, long after the Templars were suppressed. The chapel is covered in bizarre and intricate carvings that seem to blend Christian, pagan, and what some claim are Templar symbols. There are carvings of corn and aloe, plants that were supposedly unknown in Europe before Columbus's voyages, leading to the wildest part of this theory, that the Templars didn't just go to Scotland, but that Scotland was merely a base for even longer voyages. Did they use their navigational skills and secret maps to cross the Atlantic? Did they establish a secret colony in the New World, in places like Nova Scotia or New England? This is where the legend truly takes flight, connecting the lost fleet of La Rochelle to the enduring mystery of North American artifacts that predate Columbus. Back on the docks of La Rochelle, the truth is lost to the sea fog. Did the fleet vanish as part of a coordinated escape, or was it simply out on routine maneuvers? Its disappearance a coincidence that was later woven into a legend? The academic consensus leans toward the latter. But the image of those ships sailing out into the unknown, carrying the last hope of the order, is far too powerful to dismiss. It's the pivotal plot point that allows the story of the Templars to escape its tragic ending in France and begin a new, secret chapter. The salt spray of La Rochelle gives way to the damp, misty air of the Scottish Highlands. You are standing on a rain-swept moor, the landscape rugged and beautiful. The year is 1314, the same year de Molay was burned at the stake. But here in Scotland, the political climate is entirely different. Robert the Bruce, the excommunicated king, is preparing for the fight of his life against a massive invading English army led by King Edward II. This will be the Battle of Bannockburn, the most famous battle in Scottish history. This is the setting for the most dramatic chapter of the Templar in Scotland theory. The story goes that the Templar knights who fled France on the Lost Fleet have been living in Scotland for the past 7 years. They have integrated into the Scottish nobility, trained Bruce's soldiers, and shared their immense wealth to help fund his war effort. Now, on the eve of this decisive battle, they are ready to reveal themselves. The Scottish army is massively outnumbered. The English have a huge force of heavy cavalry, the medieval equivalent of a tank division. The Scots, under Bruce's brilliant leadership, have chosen their ground carefully, using the terrain to neutralize the English advantage. The battle rages for 2 days. It's a brutal, bloody affair. On the second day, at a critical moment when the battle hangs in the balance, something extraordinary is said to have happened. As you stand with the Scottish reserves, you see a new force suddenly appear on the crest of a nearby hill. They are a contingent of horsemen, but they are unlike the other rough-hewn Scottish warriors. They fight with a discipline and skill that is terrifyingly effective. They carry a banner that, according to some accounts, is the famous Templar battle flag, the bosan. They charge down the hill and smash into the flank of the wavering English army. The English, already exhausted and demoralized, see this fresh elite force entering the fray and their morale shatters completely. They break and run. The battle turns into a rout, a catastrophic defeat for the English and a glorious, nation-defining victory for the Scots. According to the legend, this mysterious force was the Knights Templar, making their dramatic, public intervention to save their new patron and secure their new home. It's a fantastic story, the kind of thing that makes for a great movie finale. But, is it true? This is one of the most hotly debated topics in the entire Templar mythos. Mainstream academic historians are, to put it mildly, deeply skeptical. They point out that there is absolutely no contemporary chronicle of the Battle of Bannockburn that mentions the presence of any Templars. The story of their dramatic charge appears in historical accounts much later, centuries after the fact. The mysterious force that appeared on the hill they argue was most likely the Scottish camp followers, servants, cooks and locals who were told to bang pots and pans and wave sheets to create the illusion of a fresh army arriving. It was a classic piece of battlefield deception by Robert the Bruce, not the arrival of a secret society of holy warriors. However, proponents of the theory have their own set of intriguing, if circumstantial, evidence. They point to the fact that Robert the Bruce, after the battle, established a new Scottish order of knights and incorporated many former Templar lands into its holdings. They also point to a network of pre-Reformation chapels and graves in Scotland that bear markings that are claimed to be uniquely Templar. For example, the tombstone of a knight at the old church of Comart in Inargyll shows a warrior with a distinctive cross patty on his chest, a symbol strongly associated with the Templars. Is this a Scottish knight, or a French Templar who made a new life here? A bizarre little tidbit often thrown into this mix is the claimed connection between the Templars and the Declaration of Arbroath of 1320. This was a famous letter sent by Scottish nobles to the Pope, asserting Scotland's independence. The language of the Declaration is unusually eloquent and powerful. The theory suggests it was drafted with the help of the highly educated Templar chaplains who had fled France. Again, there's no direct proof, but it adds another layer to the idea that the Templars were deeply integrated into Bruce's inner circle. The debate over the Templars at Beneken is a perfect example of how history and myth can intertwine. The historical evidence for their presence is virtually non-existent, but the story is so compelling, it fits the narrative so perfectly, that it has taken on a life of its own. It provides a heroic continuation for the Templars, transforming them from victims in France into kingmakers in Scotland. It's the essential bridge that allows the story to move from the historical suppression of the order to the next, even more mysterious phase of their alleged afterlife, their connection to the world of secret societies. Standing on the moor at Beneken, you can't see any definitive proof, but you can feel the power of a legend being born. The mists of Beneken, the rugged shores of Scotland dissolve, and you find yourself propelled forward in time. The leap is a significant one. Over 400 years, you land in a very different world, the early 18th century. You're in London, a city bustling with the new energy of the Enlightenment. The talk in the coffee houses is of science, reason, philosophy, and politics. It's in this environment of intellectual curiosity and a fascination with antiquity that the modern story of the Templars truly begins. You find yourself in a tavern, but it's not just any tavern. It's a large meeting of a newly prominent and fashionable society, the Freemasons. The men here are merchants, professionals, aristocrats. They wear aprons and symbolic jewels, and their meetings are filled with secret rituals, allegorical plays, and moral instruction based on the symbolism of stonemasons' tools. The origins of Freemasonry are themselves shrouded in mystery, likely evolving from medieval stonemasons' guilds. But in the early 1700s, it transformed into a speculative philosophical society. At this time, there was no connection whatsoever between the Freemasons and the historical Knights Templar. But that was about to change. A key figure in this transformation was a man named Andrew Michael Ramsay, a Scottish Jacobite exile living in France. In 1737, he delivered a famous oration in Paris. In it, he proposed a new, more romantic and noble origin for Freemasonry. He claimed that the Masons were not descended from humble stone workers, but from the Crusader Knights. He argued that after the suppression, a group of Templars had fled to Scotland, disguised themselves as Masons, and secretly preserved their ancient traditions, eventually revealing them to the world as Freemasonry. This was a brilliant piece of marketing. It gave the burgeoning Masonic movement an epic, heroic backstory. Suddenly, being a Mason didn't just mean you were part of a philosophical club. It meant you were the heir to a secret lineage of martyred holy warriors. The idea was incredibly popular and spread like wildfire. Masonic lodges throughout Europe, particularly in France and Germany, began to develop new, higher degrees of initiation that went beyond the basic craft degrees. These new degrees were explicitly knightly or valoric. This is where things get really creative. A German Masonic leader named Baron Karl von Hund, in the mid-18th century, claimed to have been initiated into a secret order called the Strict Templar Observance. He alleged that this order was the direct, unbroken continuation of the original Knights Templar, ruled by a series of unknown superiors who secretly guided the fate of Europe. He even claimed to know the location of the lost Templar treasure. His system became immensely popular for a time, attracting nobles and princes who loved the idea of being part of a secret, elite knighthood. It was, of course, a complete fantasy, but a very seductive one. You can see the appeal. The Templars had everything you'd want in a secret ancestor. They were noble. They were brave. They were fabulously wealthy. They were unjustly persecuted, and they possessed secret knowledge. By claiming the Templars as their forefathers, the Masons were also inheriting their mystique and their grievances against the tyranny of church and state, a very popular theme during the Enlightenment. A fun and often confusing fact is that today there are Masonic bodies called the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar is the final order within a system of Masonic degrees known as the York Rite. To become a Masonic Knights Templar, a person must already be a Master Mason and a Royal Archmason, and they must be a Christian. Their rituals and regalia are inspired by the historical Templars, but modern Freemasonry itself makes no official historical claim of direct descent from the medieval order. They acknowledge that the connection is philosophical and symbolic, not a literal unbroken lineage from Jacques de Molay to the present day. So how did this myth become so entrenched? It's a perfect storm of historical circumstances. The 18th century's love for chivalry and secret societies created the demand. The dramatic story of the Templars provided the perfect supply. The Scottish connection, with its tales of Robert the Bruce and Drosten Chapel, provided a plausible, if unproven, link. The result was the permanent fusion of two separate histories into one grand, overarching conspiracy theory. The debate about this connection is a non-debate for academic historians. There is zero credible evidence linking the medieval Knights Templar to the origins of speculative Freemasonry. But in the world of popular history and esoteric lore, the connection is an article of faith. It's the theory that transforms the Templars from a tragic historical footnote into an enduring, secret influence that continues to shape the world from the shadows. The quiet ritual in the London tavern has become the seed of a global myth. The candlelit, secretive world of the 18th century Masonic Lodge melts away, and you find yourself in the bright, information-saturated landscape of the modern world. You're surrounded by overflowing library shelves, the glow of computer screens, and the excited chatter of TV documentaries. The story of the Templars has escaped the confines of history books and has become a full-blown pop culture phenomenon, fueling a global, centuries-long treasure hunt. The core of this modern obsession remains the same as it was for King Philip's men, the treasure. But the definition of treasure has expanded. For some, it's still the literal gold and silver from the Paris vault. For others, it's something far more profound and powerful, lost Christian relics like the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or even secret gospels containing the true teachings of Jesus. For yet another group, the treasure isn't a physical object at all, but secret knowledge, the wisdom of the ancient world, passed down from the builders of Solomon's temple. This quest has created real-world treasure hunts that continue to this day. Perhaps the most famous is the enduring mystery of Oak Island, a small, unassuming island off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada. Since 1795, a succession of treasure hunters have been excavating a deep, booby-trapped shaft known as the Money Pit. The pit is an incredible feat of engineering with layers of log platforms, mysterious flood tunnels connected to the sea, and a stone slab allegedly inscribed with a cryptic message. The Templar theory for Oak Island suggests that the fleeing knights came here, bringing their treasure and their advanced engineering skills, and constructed this elaborate pit to hide it forever. Despite centuries of digging, millions of dollars spent, and several lives lost, the main treasure has never been found, making it the world's most frustrating and fascinating treasure hunt. Then you have the mystery of Rennes-le-Château, a tiny village perched on a hilltop in the south of France. In the late 19th century, the local priest, a man named Bérenger Sanieri, suddenly became inexplicably wealthy while renovating his small church. The legend claims he discovered ancient parchments hidden in a pillar, documents that led him to a lost treasure. The most popular theory connects this treasure to the Templars, who were very powerful in this region. Did Sonieri find a hidden Templar cache? Or did he find something even more explosive, like documents proving a secret bloodline of Jesus Christ which the Templars were sworn to protect? This story, blending local history with grand conspiracy, became the primary inspiration for the blockbuster novel The Da Vinci Code. This brings us to the Templars' immense influence on modern fiction and entertainment. You see their iconic red cross on a white background everywhere, from video games like Assassin's Creed, where they are portrayed as a powerful, centuries-old conspiracy seeking world control, to countless novels and movies. They have become the go-to organization for any story requiring a secret society with a mysterious past and unlimited resources. A funny and slightly ironic detail is that in many of these stories, they are cast as the villains, the shadowy cabal, which is a complete inversion of their original heroic image, but a direct continuation of the villainous narrative created by Philip the Fair. Why this enduring appeal? Part of it is the perfect story structure. They have a heroic beginning, a mysterious and successful middle, and a tragic, unjust end. This makes them sympathetic victims. The unanswered questions: what happened in the initiation? Where did the treasure go? Did they really have a curse? Leave a vacuum that writers and amateur historians love to fill with their own theories. The debate over the real treasure and the Templars' secrets continues to rage, mostly outside of mainstream academia. Is it all just romantic nonsense, a fun story with no basis in fact? Or is there a genuine, hidden history waiting to be uncovered? The academic position is clear: there is no credible evidence for any of these fantastic claims. But the lack of evidence is, for many, part of the appeal. It allows the Templar myth to be a blank canvas, onto which we can project our own desires for mystery, for justice for the underdog, and for the belief that there is a secret, more interesting truth hidden just beneath the surface of our mundane world. The hunt goes on, not just in pits and under churches, but in our collective imagination. The whirlwind of modern treasure hunts and pop culture conspiracies slows, and you find yourself in a quiet, reflective space. The sounds of digging and the dramatic swells of movie scores fade away, replaced by the soft hum of your own thoughts. We've traveled across centuries, from the dusty roads of Jerusalem to the burning pyres of Paris, from the misty highlands of Scotland to the cryptic shores of Nova Scotia. And now we're back where we started, with a story that has fascinated people for 700 years. So, the final question is why? Why do we still care so much about this group of medieval monks with swords? The first reason is that it's simply a fantastic story. It has all the elements of a great thriller. You have a powerful, secretive organization, a handsome and ruthless king, a weakened, trapped pope. There's immense wealth, shocking accusations, torture, a dramatic trial, a tragic ending, a dying curse, and a legend of survival against all odds. You couldn't write a better plot. It's a story that feels both ancient and incredibly modern. And that's the second reason for its entrance. Its themes are timeless. At its heart, the trial of the Knights Templar is a story about the abuse of power. It's a case study in how a powerful state can use its legal and propaganda machinery to destroy an enemy, not for justice, but for political and financial gain. King Philip's methods, the surprise mass arrests, the use of torture to manufacture confessions, the coordinated smear campaign to shape public opinion, feel chillingly familiar. We see echoes of this story in political purges and show trials throughout history, right up to the present day. It serves as a permanent cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked state power and the fragility of even the most powerful institutions when they stand in the way of a determined ruler. Then there is the powerful allure of the conspiracy theory. The Templar story is arguably the mother of all grand historical conspiracy theories. The idea that a powerful group was unjustly destroyed and then survived in secret, continuing to influence events from the shadows, is an incredibly potent narrative. It taps into a deep-seated human desire to believe that there is a hidden order behind the chaos of history, that major events aren't random but are guided by a secret hand. The Templars provide the perfect vessel for this kind of thinking. Their genuine historical secrecy makes any theory about their hidden knowledge or survival seem just plausible enough to be tantalizing. A lesser known but crucial aspect of their legacy is their role in the development of finance and international organization. While not as exciting as curses and treasure, the Templars were pioneers. They created one of the world's first large-scale banking systems. Their network of preceptor IES functioned like a modern multinational corporation with sophisticated logistics and communication. In a way, they were a prototype for the kind of global organizations we see today. Their fall is a lesson in the complex and often fraught relationship between state power and international finance. What happens when a government owes too much money to an entity it cannot control? The Templars found out the hard way. And finally, we are fascinated by the Templars because their story remains unfinished. The official historical record ends in a fire on a small island in the Seine. But the loose ends, the lost fleet, the missing treasure, the Scottish connection, leave the door open for what if. This is where the historical debate continues to simmer. While most academics agree that the order was effectively uncompletely destroyed, there is still that sliver of possibility that keeps the legend alive. The debate over whether a small remnant might have survived in some form, perhaps in Scotland or Portugal, is not entirely settled. There will likely never be a definitive answer, and that permanent state of mystery is precisely what guarantees their immortality. They are the ultimate historical underdog. They were champions of Christendom, then victims of a tyrant, and finally, in legend, they became secret masters of the world. They represent faith, wealth, power, tragedy, and rebirth. They are a mirror in which we can see our own fears about power, our own hopes for justice, and our own enduring fascination with the secrets that lie just beyond the reach of the historical record. The fire of De Molay's pyre went out 7 centuries ago, but the sparks from that fire continue to ignite our imagination, and likely will, for centuries to come. And so, the journey ends. You can feel the story settling around you, the echoes of history softening into the quiet of the room. The figures of kings and knights, once so vivid, begin to recede, becoming part of the gentle tapestry of the past. The weight of their struggles, the thrill of their mysteries, it all lightens now, transforming into the soft, hazy substance of a dream. You can let go of the reins of this adventure, allowing the current of sleep to carry you forward. The torches of the past are dimming, and the quiet, steady darkness of the present is a comfort. There are no more trials to witness, no more treasures to seek. There is only the gentle rise and fall of your own breath, a simple, peaceful rhythm in the vast silence of the night. The story is over, and now it is time for rest. The end of the article. Good night.